Connaissance, recherche,
sciences,
sciences,
mathématiques,
théorie,
physique,
philosophie,
conférences, archéologie, nature.
Thank you, Esther, for that very kind introduction, and thanks to the Collège de France and AFD for sponsoring this event and inviting me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. As Esther said, who doesn't want to be in a conference in Paris on a beautiful June day? This is an example of what I'm about to present is an example of the style of work that Esther was introducing. It's an attempt to answer a question that in some ways has been in the air for some time, and it's an attempt to answer it, as you'll see, using the experimental methodology that Esther described. It has, I will try and describe both what we did and what we tried, what we learned and what we haven't learned, and in some ways it exemplifies, I think, both the benefits and the challenges of experimental evaluations of programs, and the sense in which it can give us a kind of knowledge that is not really available from other sources. This is part of a joint project with Esther and Rachel Garrister, who are here, and Cynthia Kinnan, who's not here, and in a sense with Spandana, which is a very large microfinance organization based in Hyderabad, in India. I have to figure out how to get the page down. Okay, done. So I think microfinance, can be, entirely plausibly described as the most visible anti-poverty innovation in the past 20 years. It is certainly extremely there's a lot of hope invested in it. CdF, which is World Bank's, the part of World Bank that's dedicated to, for example, helping microfinance, has on his website this quote, which says that there's mounting evidence that availability of financial services can help achieve the MDGs. And on the website it says that there is evidence for that microfinance leads to reduction in poverty and hunger, universal primary education, promotion of gender equality and empowerment of women, reduction of child mortality, and improvements in maternal health. So whole range of I think, outcomes, it's claimed, are impacted. On the other side, there are people, this is a quote from a letter in the Financial Times, which says, in the 25 years of academic and consulting work in local economic development, my experience has been that the microfinance programs often spell the death of the local economy. So clearly there is controversy and there is disagreement. Clearly this is, if what microfinance, the promise of microfinance is that's suggested here is realized, then it will transform the way we do development entirely. And if it doesn't, then it would be another blind alley in the history of development, which is alas, rife with blind alleys. There are many other ones, and we would have found another one. So this is a question which is waiting for a randomized evaluation, I think. But let me say, I think there are people who, when you talk to people in the microfinance movement, some of them will say, why do you need an evaluation? I mean, after all, You don't evaluate apple sellers. Apple sellers sell apples. People buy apples. Apple sellers make money. End of story. I mean, why do you bother? You don't evaluate apple sellers. You don't evaluate tomato sellers. Why do you evaluate us? We sell something. People buy it. They make money. That's the end of the story. I think that I think there are two reasons why I think microfinance is different from apples, other than the fact that they don't taste as good as apples. One is that microfinance is often subsidized. In India, for example, the government requires all banks to put 40% of their total portfolio of loans into what is called the priority sector, and the priority sector, therefore priority sector essentially gets an extra credit which it would not get otherwise, and one of the places where that credit can go is to microfinance. So it is government by policy subsidizes credit to the microfinance sector. So that's one, I think, big argument. So this is not something that's making money necessarily at market prices, but at some controlled price. The second thing is, I think that, and this is historically, this is something that's always been known about credit, that credit can be tempting, credit can be debilitating. You can end up borrowing too much, getting yourself into a debt trap. So so there's something about credit which makes it more akin to possibly to something, maybe addictive or possibly dangerous, and therefore I think there is a set of people who believe that this is very different from an apple. Why do we need a randomized evaluation? So I think that this is a sort of the core question that we always have to think about, which is why do you need to do a randomized evaluation? Can't you just compare people who have microcredit and people don't? There are people in the world, similar people, poor people who have microcredit and poor people who don't have microcredit. Why don't you just compare them? Well, I think there are two reasons why not. One is that it is even among the poor, there are poorer and poorer, and microfinance organizations target a specific group among them. They are not, if you talk to any microfinance organization, they'll tell you that those people are too poor to get microfinance, and these people are too rich to get microfinance. And there's a particular category that they're targeting. So this is not a random selection of the set of poor. They're a particular group, and therefore they're selected. So they might have different outcomes in any case, even without microfinance. Second, microfinance is a choice. You don't force people to take microfinance. So when you look at the people who have microfinance, they are people who have gone and joined an organization that is something that is an expression of their desire, their demand, their willingness to do something to make their life better. And the question is, if you are such a person, would you need the help of microfinance to make you better off, or would that happen automatically even in its absence? And that counterfactual we don't have. So the other possibility is to just say, well, X did not have microfinance till, you'll see this in a lot of websites. 2 years ago, now she has microfinance, and look, she is better off. Now that's, I think, better than comparing recipients and non-recipients. At least there's some plausibility to that. But again, I go back to saying that, people who get microfinance are not necessarily people who are going to stay in the same place. They are often people who have ambitions, who want to go somewhere, and maybe without microfinance they would still keep going. These are not people who are going to stay put just because we didn't give them microfinance. They are people with ambition, aspirations, energy. And so you worry that if you just compare before and after, you will see that this is making people better off, but you might wrongly causally ascribe that to microfinance. The final thing is to compare trends, to say that, look, did the person who got microfinance improve faster than the people who didn't get microfinance? That's a bit better, again, for the same reason. But again, when you do it, you might think that the people who got microfinance are precisely the people who are more energetic, more dynamic. They are going to improve faster in any case. And so whether this is the causal effect of microfinance or not is not known. Now, an example of the problem that causes is in a very nice paper by Jonathan Murdoch from many years ago, where he looks at he compares the people who receive microfinance and looks at their trends and compares the trends with those who didn't receive microfinance from Grameen Bank, which is a well-known microfinance organization, and he shows that this is negative. This difference is negative, meaning that people who get microfinance actually end up worse off in terms of their trends than the people who didn't. Now, that of course, again, doesn't mean anything because these are different people. I keep saying the same thing, which is that different people have different trends. So it's not clear that that comparison is meaningful, but when you try to do that comparison, you end up saying that, actually the ones with microfinance are going up slower than the people. So he concluded, I think rightly, that this shows that trying to compare these two groups of people is meaningless. He did not conclude that microfinance was useless. He concluded that the study was useless. And therefore, I think the only way to really address this question is to do some kind of a randomized evaluation where we randomly choose a set of people to receive and not receive microfinance and compare their outcomes. There is some, let me say at this point, that there is actually some a fair amount of microfinance, sort of experimental work on microfinance. All of the work that is so far been available and complete is on not so much on whether microfinance makes you better off, but whether if I change certain specific aspects of microfinance, whether that changes the outcome in microfinance. So not within microfinance comparing alternative strategies. Dean Carlin, who's here, Rohini Pandey, who's here, have done important work on that. There's also some non-experimental margin evidence, I think quite convincing evidence on the impact of microfinance, but that's not actually specifically from microfinance, but from a kind of a microfinance-like product, the Thai $1 million fund, which is a government-run, community-run, government-funded program, which is very different from the standard microfinance model. So this is one of the first, or maybe the first results we're seeing from a randomized evaluation of the classic microfinance product. There are other related evaluations. Dean has one of a more of an individual loan product, and then I think he's finishing another one, Dean Cullen, who will be speaking, which also is on the same subject. So there's going to be a set of studies who all kind of trying to answer the same question. This study is sort of answers some of the. So what we're trying to do here is trying to answer, not compare different microfinance products, but really ask the question: imagine a random person, poor person, ends up getting access to microfinance. How does that change their lives? Does it change their business? Do they start new businesses? Do they change their purchases? Do they invest more? Do their children get better education? All the questions that are sort of implied by that CGAP website that we talked about. Okay, let me skip that. So this is just quickly, what is the program we are evaluating? It's a program by Spandana. It is a program which has the classic microfinance model. There's group liability, meaning that there's a group of people, all of whom have a joint liability over the loan. They're all sort of at least nominally liable for repayment of the loan. They're mostly weekly repayment. The starting loan is about $200 to $250, depending on the exchange rate. That's 10,000 rupees. The interest rate charged over this period was sort of 24%, I think, this is an organization which also promises its clients that if they repay the loan, they will get a bigger loan next time. So it has all the classic elements of a microfinance loan. This is a very large MFI, one of the largest in India. We looked at this organization at the point where it started expanding in the city of Hyderabad. So it was an organization which was quite large outside the city of Hyderabad, but was starting its operations in Hyderabad. And they agreed, because they were also interested in this question of what impact they were having, to randomly phase in their expansion in Hyderabad. So the basic model of randomization was that we took a set of communities within the Hyderabad city. These were small, what you could call slums, but small communities of poor people, and we chose a set of these communities. We randomly assigned some of them to be covered by microfinance right away, and some of them to be covered in 2 years. So the plan was not to deprive anybody of microfinance, but to actually to delay access to microfinance over some period of time. So that was the strategy adopted for randomization. So this was what is called a phase-in design. So this is a microfinance group. They're waiting to, I think, pay their loan, make their loan payment, weekly loan payment to the loan officer. We had a let me right now mostly emphasize the results that I'm going to show you will come from a survey that compares these what we call treatment communities with, or treatment slums with control slums. This was done between 15 and 24 months after they got the loan, so something on average maybe 18, 19 months, so a year and a half after they got the loan. And they were about I think in each slum, what we did was we identified people by characteristics that would make them likely to be borrowers. We cannot sample on borrowers. In some places they are borrowers and some people not. But we can identify people's characteristics and say, this is a person, even where Spandana is not offering the loan, we can say, this is a person who would have got a loan if Spandana wanted to lend there. And so we identified those people, and then we oversampled them. So we had 52 treatment and 52 control slums. We surveyed about 7,200 households. They had to be, as I said, they had to be kinds of households Spandana would lend to, which include the fact that Spandana only lends to women, so they had to have one woman between the ages of 18 and 55 in the household. These are fairly poor households. The households in these areas, there are the family size is between 5 and 6. They have their monthly expenditure is about 5,000 rupees. So this is a family of 5 living on $125 a month. That's less than $1 a day per head. At market prices, a bit more than that at PPP. So they are not, if you take the World Bank's measurement, these are not the poorest of the poor. They're sort of somewhat richer than the poorest of the poor. They are children going to school. They are, at the point of the survey, they are actually borrowing from money lenders, and they are paying 4% per month. So when Spandana comes in, one of the things it's doing is it's lowering the interest rate they're paying from 4% per month to 24% per year. So that's a very substantial reduction in the interest rate they're facing. And in the baseline, there was no microfinance borrowing pretty much. They do one other striking fact about this population, and this is a fact about many poor populations in the world, is that there's an enormous amount of what one might call entrepreneurship. Many of them run businesses. So if you look at the OECD average, 12% of households say that they have a business, and that includes being a lawyer. And in this poor population, 31% run a business, and 9% run 2 businesses or 3 businesses. These businesses are small. They tend to be of the kind of stores, tailors, etc. Most of them don't have employees, and many of them have no assets, no visible assets. Their business is them, if you like. The businesses make about $75 a month on average profits. These are the businesses, if you like. That's a nice picture. Those are fruit stalls, and you can see that each one of those stalls is a separate business. They're all competing for each other to sell people apples, for example. We checked that the treatment and the control slums look pretty similar, and they do. I mean, you see some differences, but none of these are statistically significant. They are the people in the control spend 25 rupees less per month. They are slightly more likely to have a business, etc., but very small differences. None of them statistically significant. So the randomization actually chose 2 identical groups. Check this. When you ask them why you want their loan, they say, well, some of them say, and this reflects the fact that many of them have credit, just to repay an old loan. That's one of these standard answers, 30%. Another 30% say that they're going to start a new business. Another 20-something% say they're going to start existing business. And then, there's daughters' weddings and buying a TV and all of those other answers. Education is not one of the important answers, and nor surprisingly is health shock. So you might imagine that somebody would say, I need to take my mother to the hospital or get her surgery, but those seem to be less important answers than the other ones. I'll skip this. Except to say that what happened, it's important to one fact. So remember, all we can do is randomize access to loans from Spandana. Now, Spandana is not the only possible game in town. The other microfinance organizations would wanted to join, to come in and lend to these people. So while at the baseline there was very little microfinance borrowing, microfinance in general was expanding. So what happened was that there was expansion of microfinance even in what we were calling the control slums. So instead of thinking that there is only microfinance borrowers in the treatment and none in the control, we ended up with having about a difference of about only 8 percentage points between treatment and control, largely because in the control, the competition started moving in. So there was still a difference, and this difference is a result of the randomization, so we can still interpret it, but it is a difference which is relatively small, which made us very nervous. So while this study was happening, we were kind of holding our breath for about a year, thinking, well, maybe we won't see any difference, because in the treatment we have Spandana, in the non-treatment we have the competition, there's no difference. Fortunately, God was willing, and we ended up having enough of a difference to be able to interpret the results. Let me just quickly, in order to sort of motivate what we're going to find, just suggest one slide of thinking about in the abstract, what would you expect in such a setting? Well, think about a situation where people have there are people who want to start a business, but starting a business has a fixed cost. So you can't start a business without a certain amount of capital. Now, if the business needs a fixed cost, then and then it also needs variable costs of running the business. Then what happens when you have increase in credit access? Those who don't have a business Those who have a business say, okay, I can expand my business. I can invest a bit more in it and pay the more variable cost. I can use more working capital. They expand the business. The people who don't have a business have a harder problem. Why? Because they're thinking, look, I can take this loan, but the loan may not be enough to pay for that machine I want to buy. So I will have to find some extra money to start the business. So what you might observe when you offer people a loan is actually that at the beginning they respond by cutting back on consumption. Why? Because they want to fund that investment that they can then take their business to scale. So you might actually see people consuming less, looking poorer, because they have now just been given this opportunity. So one thing to be careful about is if you see people consuming less, you might actually worry that this is, well, is microfinance making them poorer? Well, no. Microfinance has raised their future income, but it has made them poorer right now in terms of consumption because they feel that now that I have this opportunity to make some real money, I'm going to cut back on consumption, conserve those resources, and use them for something else. So that's the one thought to keep in mind. Other people who are never going to invest in a business, of course, the microfinance loan has just basically, why did they take the loan? Probably because to pay down some other debt. So they probably paid down their other debt. They were paying 4% per month. Now they're paying 2% per month. They are better off. They're richer, and so they can increase their consumption. They are no longer required. So but the point is that there is heterogeneity in response. Some people will start consuming more when they get the loan. Some people will start consuming less when they get the loan because they're anticipating the future. So that's just to set the stage. As I said, if you look at the difference between microfinance loan take-up, Spandana loan take-up the difference is large, but the microfinance loan take-up, the Spandana is small because the competition moved in. There was still a difference, so we can actually look at the effect of it. The average difference is about 1,250 rupees, difference in microfinance borrowing across the slums. So remember, this looks like a small number, but remember the difference is over only 8% of the population. So this is not nearly as small as it looks. So we do see significant impact on a number of outcomes. Two things that you see. One is an increase in new businesses. So 1.7% more new businesses get created. This is on a base of 5.3%. So two things to be said about this. One is that you might think this looks small, this is not transforming lives. But remember, people aren't actually creating a lot of businesses. Business creation isn't that fast. So, this is a 1/3 increase in the number of businesses created. They were creating 5.3% of the families were creating a new business. Now 7% are. So this is a 30% increase in the number of businesses created. That's not small. I mean, if you think about it, most family households in a given year don't create a business. Therefore, this is not. Profits go up very substantially. Revenues go up. So you do see, the existing businesses make money and new businesses get created. You don't see an impact on average consumption. You see a small impact, but not significant. That's not surprising, as I had said, because some people might actually reduce consumption. So we're going to look at that in a second. You do see an increase in durable purchases. One thing that seems to happen is that this is, remember, people now getting a lump sum of money, so they can, if they wanted to buy a TV all along or a machine, they can go buy it, and you see both of those. And interestingly, and this is something that Spandana keeps emphasizing, you see a reduction in the consumption of what Spandana classifies as, Spandana is this MFI, as temptation goods, meaning goods that people spend on, but they don't really want to spend on, like more alcohol, betel leaves, which is something people in India chew, tobacco, tea. I drink a lot of tea, so I feel uncomfortable over calling it a temptation good, but nonetheless, this is Spandana's classification. So you see a reduction in spending in those. You do not see any change, and this is what was striking, in any of the other outcomes. The Millennium Development Goals were the outcomes that were listed. Education is not changed, nor is we asked what fraction of women decisions are taken by family, spending decisions taken by women. The fraction is high in this, at least claimed fraction is high here, and that doesn't change between them. So it's not that we see that women are taking more decisions. We don't see health expenditure going up, and we don't see children's health improving. We see no evidence of any of those things. The last thing, and I'm running out of time, is what we wanted to see is go back to the story I told. Remember I said that there are three categories of people. People who already own a business, who are going to take this money and probably put it into their business and the business will expand. People who don't own a business and who want to start a business, who are going to maybe cut back in consumption and put their money into their new business. And then people who are never going to start a business, who are just taking this money for extra spending. So whose spending should jump up. So we should see three categories of people. Some people will see their profits go up, some people will see their consumption go up, and some people will see their consumption going down, but new business starting up. And how do we look at that? Well, we can predict using some characteristics of the family, which are the businesses which are likely to start a new business. And one of the things that makes that likely is having some assets and having a spouse, so land, for example, and having a spouse who, like, basically having typically the interview is of the household head, so a man, spouse is a woman. So if there's a woman in the family who's literate and who's not working right now, that's a very good predictor of starting a business. She's sort of able to start a business, hasn't started a business, and that's a good predictor. So what we do is we look at families which are predicted to start a new business and see whether that set of families which don't have a business but are predicted to start one, and if they behave any differently than the others. And I'm just going to report the results. So if you take the families which are likely to be families that start a business, we indeed find that in treatment they're 5 percentage points more likely to start a business. Suppose nearly 50% more likely to start a business. So the people we predict do start a business. The ones who already have a business, there's not much of a difference. And people who we kind of predict not to start a business don't start a business. So that's reassuring. And we find that the people who are about to start a business do buy durables, often perhaps business durables. People who have an old business also buy durables, maybe machines, maybe some kind of a asset. People who don't have a business don't buy an asset. They spend it on something else. They spend it on, so the different behaviors. People, and now going back to this fact that I said that consumption goes down, the only group for whom consumption goes down is the people who are about to start a business. They are the people whose consumption goes down significantly. The people whose consumption goes up significantly are the people who are never likely to start a new business. So you have two different sets of people. The reason why there is no impact on consumption is some people are cutting back deliberately to allow their business to expand. In that sense, it seems very consistent with the story that I started with. I'll skip over these results to say this is the beetle leaf shop. He's about to supply a temptation good. And you see that the demand for temptation good is the new business owners reduce per month, per capita, 40 rupees less consumption of temptation goods. So you see exactly the pattern you would expect. With these people are ambitious, they're trying to get ahead, they cut back on consumption. But on the other side, the people who not going to start a business, they expand their consumption of temptation goods when they have more money. So you see the pattern you might have expected in that as well. Let me just conclude. It seems like what did we learn from this? One thing we learned to start with is that in this environment, at least, and possibly in others where we have found, that the take-up of microfinance loans is actually often lower than predicted. There's often this, I think we started with a claim from Spandana, not I think a made-up claim, but a claim that I think based on the fact that they had never looked at the data carefully, that 80% of the population will take up microfinance when offered. In fact, 25% do. And I think that difference comes from the fact that I think they look at the people who are likely to be borrowers. Among them, of course, the borrowing rate is very high. We look at the whole population, and it's not that microfinance affects everybody. It affects here a quarter of the population. Again, microfinance does have an impact, exactly kind of impact we might have expected in a sense. Some people start a new business. The people who start a new business cut back on consumption to expand their business. Their profits go up. But then you do see this other fact that people are consuming more. Now, whether that's consuming more because they are actually being tempted into consumption, or whether they are consuming more because they are now richer because they're not paying the money lender 4% per month, is a question that we would love to answer, and we might have to go back to the data to this sample later to look at and to answer. We can't answer that right now. In summary, microfinance may neither be life-changing, that the life-changing experience that some have described, nor the new usury. The bottom line is that it's something that contributes to a lot to the lives of those who want to be new entrepreneurs, but maybe there are others who are not really touched by it, or who may even be somewhat tempted to do things that are not really good for them. It is, in other words, this is, I think, where we end up is somewhere between CGAP and the man writing in the Financial Times, with a view that this is, I think, certainly should be and could be a big part of a strategy against poverty, but is probably not right to think of it as the thing that will solve all the problems in the world. And if you had to deal with problems like education, lack of education, and poor child health, you might have to think of other more conventional interventions as well along with it. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear Esther. So what we've just heard, by way of study, this study was launched, 1 or 2 years ago by a team, by GPAL, working in conjunction with the Amana Association to promote microfinance operations in Morocco. Now, one of the questions that were raised earlier on, was why? Why should this study take place in the first instance? And why so expensive a study? And one of the answers I can give you in this respect is the following. Now, these aren't studies that pretend to track each beneficiary of microfinancing, or even a beneficiary institution. No, here we're talking about a learning curve that, in theory at least, should enable people to support the 10,000 microfinancing institutions that exist currently in the world, to shed light on the work they're undertaking, to provide them a better ability to support the 160 million people that are benefiting from their work today, or even the 2.3 billion people that these institutions would seek to serve or help. And so quite obviously, with that in mind, and faced with the scale of things of that magnitude, we must, give ourselves the luxury of running studies, of running very deep-seated studies, even if that involves getting findings that would reject, if you like, our pretensions, if you like, and that's just where the previous speaker finished, is at the end of the day, the rhetoric that we had for a number of years, some of us, thinking that every time you give 200 euros worth of loan to somebody, we're saying, if you like, that we've extracted him or five other members of his family from poverty, or on the other end of the scale, other kind of rhetoric would be saying that, okay, we're doing this systematically. We're only systematically, rather, over-indebting a population that would be very happy, thank you very much, to avoid this extra burden, this debt burden, this financial burden that we're lumping on their shoulders. So, now, in our particular case, Amana is an institution whose remit is to contribute to providing people, to get people to get involved in the economy more. So this is a not-for-profit association status, similar to the status enjoyed in France, and it's been running for a number of years. And this institution is mobilized by this idea of getting more people into the economy. Now, this corresponds to one side, if you like, of microfinancing. Now, the other side being service providers, if I can term them that way. Mr. Banerjee talked about people who said that, well, I'm an Apple seller. Well, why are you laying down golden rules for us? But it's quite real that microfinance should involve that. On the one hand, you've got people who are saying, okay, it's a business, and it's a business here where there is a proven market. There is a demand out there, and a solvent demand, and a demand that can be sustainable in the long term. That's on the one hand, and so, if you like, we're there to extend the financial sphere to include those people who are currently left by the wayside. And that's on the one hand. On the other hand, there's another catalyst, if you like, are people who are saying, okay, there is a genuine need, financial, social, and economic, okay, with an influence on the quality of life or economic activity of individuals. And these individuals not only deserve to enjoy a capitalist kind of endeavor to service their needs, but these populations also require a specific effort. And that effort is what? Well, it is a donation effort and a support effort working hand in glove with the international community to finance the seed capital, if you like, of this type of endeavor, and to finance its development, its ongoing nature, now through public authorities, through maybe revamping the fiscal framework in a given country, in a beneficiary country, in order to stimulate this new burgeoning sector. And that would also involve substantial commitment on the part of civil society, researchers, who would make it possible for the sector to develop in order to help a kind of a social situation improve. Now, this, once again, saw the hatching or the development or the stabilization of, and over the last few years, of something that has been really held up as an example, as an exemplar. We've seen everything that has been done leafing through the papers, and also we've seen, the Nobel Peace Prize, by way of example, which is awarded to one of the figureheads of microfinancing in the past. So today, it's by no means something that we can rule out we can't rule out that there is a backlash effect. In development, there's a fad effect. And, fads go up and down. They come in and out. And that happens partly because of the genuine understanding of a given realm and its meaningfulness and its size and importance. So if we only have anecdotal or episodic or limited or not very credible scientific evidence, well, obviously, journalists that yesterday were holding us up as exemplars, as paradigms, well, now they're going to realize, well, okay, there are work cases where, yeah, there are success stories, but okay, that's all very well. But there are other areas where institutional behaviour or some institutional agents' behaviour have given rise to terrible circumstances for some of these beneficiaries. So, and that's actually what we're looking at today. I think that is in France 2 or 3 weeks ago, the television channel France 2, there was a programme which is particularly critical of microfinancing and Challenge, this month's edition of Challenge magazine focused on a microfinance player and devoted an article to him, and was very vehement and virulent against the action of that individual. So we need, quite honestly, to be able to say that we've got a proper discourse, if you like, and that's grounded on the facts, something tangible and impactful. So it's not the first time, however, that microfinancing uses impact studies. If you look at Amana, for example, we've done our 5th or 6th study already. But quite clearly, other studies that we have performed in the past were limited. On the one hand, because they were modest in scale, they were on the scale of the given institution. We didn't want to overstretch ourselves and spread us too thinly. And because we had that modesty of approach, if you like, we couldn't allocate all our resources to actually achieving scientific to spread ourselves too thinly, because otherwise we'd have spread it too thinly, and so it wouldn't have been possible, and it would have cost too much money. And that's something different to simply say, okay, our Amana teams went to people and they discovered that there was a substantial impact on X, Y, Z. No. Now, in our particular set of circumstances then, that of Amana, what can I tell you? Now, what has been provided to the microfinance sector? Now, the contribution, for the most part, what Mr. Debras called earlier on fatigue, development fatigue, he mentioned that earlier on in his introductory remarks, that, if you like, was framed by the very robust hegemony of neoliberalism, and that, during the 1980s, 1990s. And it was at that particular point in time that it was discovered that there was a tool. There was a tool that was that enabled us to reach a vast amount of people, a vast number of people, and to reach that number of people. And among those, that vast array of people, there were the people who are marginalised and excluded and very poor, and women, and that this tool could reach those people with sums per capita that were very low. And it was a system that could be self-perpetuating. There was no need to relaunch it episodically. This money was just flowed and sustained itself when it was injected into the system. And this was done under the banner of business creation. Individuals who are responsible individuals. I mean, it's not. We're not just giving money. No, it's loans. We disperse monies, and they have to reimburse those monies, and even to pay enough to make sure that the mediation costs are covered, or even that there's a slight profit in order to take it forward as an ongoing concern. So that trend, which was met with the open arms of the neoliberals. I mean, it's by no means happenstance that the USAID, for example, was the major catalyst of international microfinancing development over the 1980s, 1990s. Now, that movement, if you like, encountered another for promotion of social economy, which believed in grassroots development, believed in the responsibility of individuals and groups, which believed in the ability to help individuals and communities, believed in mutual hand-in-glove work on the part of the public authorities, and believed in alternatives to a pure freewheeling liberal paradigm. So it was that encounter, if you will, relatively paradoxical in nature. Out of that encounter, a movement was born which was rich and varied, and in which we can actually find that plurality, or that extremism, if you like, in the rhetoric that went hand in hand with that movement as it unfolded. Now, once again, this dichotomy, this baseline dichotomy, if you like, shows that knowledge promotion in and of itself is crucial. It's by getting out of kind of laudatory rhetoric based on an anecdote or just faddish passion, as Esther said earlier on. It's that that's going to enable each and everyone to take up a stance. And when I say each and everyone, I'm referring to decision makers, public policy makers, who allocate resources. And I'm also thinking about civil society, which, for its part, allocates value, attributes value and effort. Throw themselves into the fray to foster those activities. And quite clearly, it's when you actually believe that you're actually making a valuable contribution, it's then that you're ready to throw yourself more into the fray and commit even more deeply into what you're undertaking. So what does this lead us to do on the grassroots level? I mean, this is pretty much the approach that was talked about by Esther in January and was covered in the summary remarks to introducing this colloquium. Basically, we wanted to get equivalent couples of communities, if I can put it that way, with which we were going to provide input on a randomized basis over a given period. And so, make it credible, it was necessary that this should be done on a large scale. And with our organization, we chose 80 pairs of villages in areas where there had never been microfinancing projects before our program. So we were lucky enough, actually, that this partnership was crafted at a time when microfinancing was, in those days, pretty much inexistent in the rural areas of Morocco. And so we had the choice, to a certain extent, if you like, to go to virgin territory, if you like. Hence, have a better mastery, better grasp of the impact of our input. And also to take a long, protracted period of time. We hoped actually that the program could unfold over 4 years, but even 4 years isn't really enough, actually, with hindsight, for a proper maturity of the program. But there we are, and we structured this approach by saying, okay, we're going to turn up in a village, we're going to choose two hamlets, if you like, and then we'll make sure that there's an equivalent profile between these hamlets in terms of size, living conditions, in terms of potential impacts on their development. And we choose therefore to choose. We arbitrary choice. We'll provide contribution in one of the hamlets, and constant intervention in one, and 1 day in the other. So obviously, to find virgin territory, to hand over the support, the organisation effort, the training of operators, the daily running of data collection, handing that over to grassroots teams. And that meant that we had to make concessions about entrepreneurial opportunism, which would want that, okay, once you're in a hamlet and you've got the opportunity to help people, well, you might as well, make economies of scale straight away. And also there was the inherent risk that because we'd actually differed the intervention on a deliberately with some, they were actually making concessions with regard to our remit, which was that of helping people, making concessions, therefore, with our desire to do that and to have a scientific probant study. Now, often you have to make concessions on the systems you use because, you know, when we went into the rural area in some hamlets or villages, quite obviously, there were women who were excluded from trade, if you like, and finance activities. So our deliberate approach was to actually turn our back on refusing to disperse monies if a certain minimum ratio of women were not involved in the activity. And when this, you know, I mean, and sometimes, of course, we had to make arbitrage, you know, what concessions are we going to make? But there was also the other point that had to weigh in the equation. Some of our agents were more encouraged to get involved in a more important hamlet where things weren't appraised, rather than in tiny, far-flung hamlets, which would be very cumbersome and unwieldy. So we had to modify our organisation to make sure that the agents on the ground really got fully on board with the approach. We had to make sure that, well, I said we started up in Virgin Territory, that's fine, but we rolled everything out in 2007 and 2006, 2007. Our peers joined us in the same hamlets, and so we had to negotiate with them to see how could they work hand in glove with us. Well, we had to negotiate, had to enter into talks, and everybody obviously had to get what they wanted out of it, because obviously if they're going to set our findings out of kilter, then that's no good. And then in addition to that, there was also another constraint. Well, I think it's pretty true for all studies as a whole, but we went to the ground with working assumptions. I mean, you can never imagine that you're going to study an impact about something you've never thought about hitherto. So when you choose working hypotheses that you wish to put to the test, well, you are going to focus on what is the most forecastable, if you like, and what is the most appraisable. And so quite clearly, that type of evaluation is going to give us indications about more quantifiable things than other qualitative issues. In microfinance, women's contribution is very important. Women empowerment is important, but that's not something that's always easy to put a number on. Sometimes it's just a relationship in the household or an image of oneself. Sometimes, and we saw this, I think, in India, there's also the inverse effect that make sure that my wife is better acknowledged and feels better in and of herself. That, if you like, reinforced some problems within the couple. You know, the woman, if you like, is sometimes becomes more autonomous, and so, you know, says to her hubby, you know, I'm not listening to you anymore. So this sort of study is extremely important to confer upon us additional tools to appraise and to evaluate in the first instance. Second, to take our ideological rhetoric, if you like, take it to a more objective stance. But again, here are things that, in the short term at least, these are something that are going to pick up on all our questions, and they're not going to shed light on everything that we want to deal with. Quite obviously, impact studies, the randomized impact studies, and other types of evaluations, and all the support provided by the scientific community and by the policy maker and financial sponsors, all that is crucial. Thank you very much.